Hello and welcome to the Car Care Nut channel. In today's video, we're going to be taking kind of a deep dive into Toyota's updated 2GR FKS. Now, the Toyota V6 3.5 liter has been around since 2005. Many people love it. It is kind of a stand of reliability. However, around 2016-2017, Toyota updated it. And for lack of a better word, they almost changed the whole thing, but they still called it the 2GR FKS. So in this video, we'll take a deep dive, take a look at what changed, what's good, what's not, and some common problems that have popped up with this engine. But before we get started, if you're new to the channel, welcome. Consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos if you are a returning subscriber. Well, thank you so much for watching another one of my videos. And without further ado, let's get right into it. So let's clarify one thing before we get started. I said 2016. A version of this engine, 2GR FKS, came out with the redesigned 2016 Tacoma. However, that V6 is slightly different in the way it operates and a few odds and ends that are different. In 2017, this version, which we're going to talk about today, came out in the Highlander, the Sienna, and then in 2018 in the Camry V6, and then in 2019 in the Avalon V6. And it continued on. There's no longer 2GR FE. All we have is 2GR FKS. Having said that, let's start with the mechanical changes. So let's talk about the mechanical changes on the 2GR FKS. The first thing being the cylinder head changed and the front timing cover changed, and then the block changed slightly, but not significant, where it's completely all new, all different, mostly similar. However, most of the changes were in the cylinder head. Now, the first thing you notice when you open the hood in one of these is the plastic valve covers. A lot of people have mixed opinions about them. However, they didn't just slap plastic valve covers. A lot had to change for them to go on. So in order to use these plastic valve covers, they had to revamp the VVTi system. In the past, you remember, and here's a picture of that if you don't, there was two oil control valves on the valve cover, and that is what controlled the variable valve timing. So the computer controlled these small oil control valves, and those changed the flow of oil to the gears, to the timing gears, and that's what changed the timing of the engine. However, in order for them to put this plastic valve cover, and you notice the gleaming absence of the oil control valves, well, they relocated them here. However, it was not as simple as just, oh, let's just put them here and have them stick out. They completely changed the design where now the plunger part of the oil control valve actually sits inside the cam gear, and then you have this solenoid on the outside that has a small plunger that pushes on that and changes. What they gained by this is you don't have all this oil travel and more possibility for clogging and all these problems that were somewhat common when the older engine was neglected. Now you had a direct control where the oil doesn't travel as much in the engine. Let me take one of these oil control valves, the new style, the solenoid now, not an oil control valve. Basically, split the oil control valve in half. Let me take one of them out and I'll show you and we'll see how it works. So here's how that looks like. Do you see when I flip it, the plunger comes out? So the computer controls this plunger in and out to control how much advanced or retarded the cam timing is. Very easy to replace, super accessible, and this design has been around with other manufacturers before. However, Toyota is always late to the game because they want to make sure everything is perfectly fine-tuned to their very meticulous reliability standards. So they took their time, but it's here. This style was very famous for a long time, but this is how that works. And then inside on the other side where that solenoid is, that is the cam timing gear, and that little plunger in the middle is what the solenoid pushes to change the timing. So then going back, one thing that was missing now, if you remember in the old one, and I'll put a picture right here so you can see it, there used to be variable valve timing lines running from here all the way down, same thing on the back, and it was a notorious thing for this engine when it was in its early days for that second line on bank 1, on the bank towards the back, for that rubber line to rupture and cause all this mess. Well, those two lines are gone. They don't exist anymore. It still has the oil cooler line, which is of course all metal now, so you don't have those problems anymore. So that's a big improvement. The plastic valve covers, many have voiced concerns over them. I am not concerned because I've handled them already. They're well made. I don't think we're going to have problems like some other manufacturers, but it is a smaller valve cover, lower, because you don't have all these lines that run through it and all the VBTI oil running through it. The only raised part toward the end is where the PCV valve is. That's still very easily accessible for maintenance. Another major thing that changed with this engine, and it's really hard to show you here, but I'll show you a few pictures here, is the exhaust manifold. Most of these V6s, they have big exhaust manifolds, 3 in 3. They were very difficult to remove and service, especially the back one over there. But on this engine, the exhaust manifold is integrated into the cylinder head. So the exhaust comes up and it just bolts to the cylinder head in like 3-4 bolts. Very, very ingenious design and very simple to service. When you have to remove one of these, it is a nightmare before, especially the back one, because it's so big and you have to maneuver it. Now it's very simple, few nuts, and the whole thing comes out. You have plenty of room to take them out, so that made serviceability easier. And another thing that changed on this side of the engine is the belt tensioner. If you remember the old 2GR FE, the old style, the belt tensioner sat behind, or the housing of the belt tensioner sat behind the compressor. It was a nightmare to remove. You had to pull the compressor, all this mess. Well, in this one, they thought of that, and it's actually redesigned where it's very simple. It's right there in the front, few bolts, and it comes right out, so you don't have to remove the compressor and all this mess. So that's a very welcome improvement. The lubrication system, other than this fancy nose of the filler cap, everything remained the same. The oil pump is still in the front timing cover. The front timing cover did change in shape just to accommodate the openings for the solenoids for the different variable valve timing and the different valve covers, but the location is the same, the function is the same. The only thing really that changed for owners, if you would, this is a video for owners, the capacity of the oil changed because of the different shapes and the smaller valve cover, all this changes. We went from 6.4 quarts on most of them to 5.8 quarts on most of them. Let's talk about the cooling system. So you notice as soon as you open the hood, there's this plastic pipe right here. Yes, unfortunately they started using some more plastic in these engines, including the thermostat housing, and then on the other side of the engine, the Y pipe that connects the two cylinder heads with the bypass hose. That is unfortunate. However, on this style engine, I have not seen failures on the plastic parts yet. Fingers crossed we won't have issues, that it is actually high quality plastic, just like the valve cover. Well, time will tell us that. However, things changed completely on the cooling system end. The water pump is redesigned, and I have news, it still leaks, unfortunately. And then they added a heated thermostat. Don't understand the exact logic of it. However, in certain situations, and this is quoting from the text, in certain situations when the engine is cold, however, you accelerate very hard, certain spots of the block will warm up too much, and they need that really cold coolant to pass through, so they will force the thermostat open and circulate really cold coolant to colder spots. Don't know why don't we have just a door that opens and closes to control the temperature of the engine, but I am not an engineer. That is just my small mind thinking, if you would. However, we have a heated thermostat, which is actually this whole housing, as you see in this picture. That is the heated thermostat. So the fuel system, I brought you the beauty cover back, not because it's now flimsy and not hard plastic, but because it says D4S. That is Toyota's direct injection system that uses both port and direct injectors. Let's talk about that for a few minutes. So this engine has two fuel systems. It has port injectors, just like before. They're right here, very simple. They spray into the intake manifold and life is good. But at the same time, they have 6 direct injectors. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, we have a Toyota with 12 injectors. The direct injectors sit directly below the intake manifold right here, and they spray directly inside the cylinder. Now, that is very efficient, and it really helps with efficiency, power, fuel economy, all kinds of stuff. But the direct injection, as you all know, has one downside: carbon buildup, which destroys these engines. And Lexus found out the hard way with their IS250s when carbon was building up, when those engines were direct injected only. However, Toyota was not going to do that to you and me and everybody that drives very common cars all over the place. So they added this dual injection system for you. So you have port and direct. You're not going to have carbon buildup problems, because what starts the carbon buildup problems is the lack of fuel passing over the back of the intake valves to clean them. Because when you have direct injection only, the fuel will only go directly inside the cylinder, never pass through the intake manifold over the valve. So that's how they start carboning up. But in the case of this engine, you have both of the worlds. You have the direct injection for efficiency, for better performance, better fuel economy, but at the same time you have the port injection, which has its benefits in certain times, but it'll also defeat the problem of the carboning up the intake valves, because you're now cleaning them every once in a while. And the computer will switch back and forth between the modes, and that's how you hear it's loud. And in order for this system to work, they also had to add a high pressure fuel pump, which is all the way in the back. I'll shoot a picture right here so you can see. It's kind of hard to remove all this to show you, but they had to add that, and that is driven by one of the back camshafts. Very simple, and that's the horrible noise you hear every once in a while when these engines are running, because every time that pump comes on and direct injection runs, the injectors themselves are loud, the pump is loud. So that's the racket that you hear. It sounds like a diesel, then all of a sudden it's nice and quiet when it switches back to port injection. This engine, just like the one before it, does not have a fuel filter, only the little sock that is built in the fuel pump in the fuel tank. So let's go over the fuel pump situation, because a lot of you have asked me about this. There is one fuel pump in the fuel tank. There's one fuel line that comes all the way to the front and then splits into two. One of them goes to the injector rail, the port injector rail, and one of them goes to the high pressure fuel pump, which is right here on the valve cover. And that pressurizes the fuel up to 3,000 psi, and it goes into the direct injectors. The reason it has to go that high, because it needs to overcome the combustion pressure. Not just overcome it by a little bit, it needs to overcome it by a lot, so it could make that perfectly fine mist that we need for perfect combustion. And because of this direct injection party that we got going on, we had to add a vacuum pump, which is actually on that back cylinder on this side of the cylinder head, also driven by the camshaft. All it does is just supply vacuum in certain situations. When the vacuum of the engine drops, it'll supply vacuum to the booster, so you wouldn't have that interruption of power-assisted brakes. So let's talk about some common problems with this engine. This engine has been out for a few years, and we've seen some problems. We've seen some high mileage cars. We've seen a lot of stuff with this engine. So let me share with you some of the common problems that I see in this engine. The first one being is oil leaks, and most of these oil leaks have to do with production. Not design, not engineering. So these oil leak problems, you're likely not going to see them down the road where the car has 150,000 miles and all of a sudden it starts leaking. Most of these were very early, and actually first oil change, second oil change type leaking all over the place. And they were limited to the first year, maybe two, maybe three. And one car, actually two cars, were very common for this, and then it stopped. 2017, 18, and 19, Highlander and Sienna. These 3 years, and got much less toward 19, but 17 and 18, we've seen a lot of cases. The first oil leak is the front timing cover. And this is a famous one with the 2GR FE, the old one. The new ones, unfortunately, we've had similar issues. But as of today, as of the date of filming this video, it is not as common as the previous one. Most of them were when the car was new. Another common leak, and this one leaked right off the bat, production issue again, is the secondary subpan. There's the oil pan at the bottom, then there's another oil pan on top. That one notoriously misdiagnosed as a rear main seal. Speaking of the rear main seal, there is a plate around the rear main seal. So here's your rear main seal, and then there's a plate that houses the rear main seal. That plate also leaked a lot on these when they were newer, on the first year especially. But as of today, let's say 2020 and up, I haven't really seen any. And yes, you're saying, well, these cars are still new. Actually, no, because the 17 and 18s, we're talking it comes in for the first oil change or first service at 5,000 miles, and the thing is leaking already because they were production issues. But 2020s, we've already seen some with 20, 30, 40,000 miles. They're not leaking, life is good. And another common problem, and unfortunately this is a carryover from the previous one, the water pumps. They redesigned the water pump, but it still has issues. It still leaks, they still make noise as they get older. That's just the way it is. It is a lot less than the previous one, especially going back to 2005, where they were a lot with the original 2GR FE when first came out. They're about the same difficulty to replace, same labor rate, same everything. The engine does not have to come out to replace the water pump, just like the old one. Initially, they said that you do have to remove the engine to replace the water pump, but you don't. This one, you can do it in the car. A little tighter because of that heated thermostat, but it's not too bad. Speaking of the heated thermostat, that is the current trending problem with these. You get check engine light with codes for thermostat, or lack of heat or weak heating in the winter. The thermostats, something is going on with the thermostat where it's opening too early without command from the computer, or it's getting stuck partially open, and then the car never warms up completely. It's as simple as replacing the thermostat. It's actually the whole thing. There's no actual thermostat that you pull out. It's a medium difficulty job, not really super difficult. You do have to remove that thermostat when you replace the water pump. So if you're ever replacing a water pump, it wouldn't be a bad idea to replace that joint. It's actually plastic, so maybe we'll start preventative plastic leaks from now with the thermostat. Another thing that I want to bring to your attention, and this is not an actual problem with the engine, but you'll hear about this here and there through people complaining, people upset. When this engine came out, this is exclusive to 2017, whether Highlander or Sienna, there was a problem from the factory with the valve guides. They caused all kinds of issues with these engines, and some people had 200-300 miles and the engine was all torn apart to replace the heads. That is not a problem with this engine. I just want to make that clear because many people have voiced concern. Many viewers have contacted me about this and was like, hey, we heard about this, we're worried, what's going on here? That was a manufacturing issue limited to a very small number of these engines when they were very new. I mean, you did not make it to 200-300 miles if you had a defective one. So almost all of these got fixed. Life is good. If you ever read about this problem, this is not an actual problem with the design of this engine. Another one that is common, some of these models have a fuel pump recall. Nothing crazy about that. It's just a fuel pump that had an issue with manufacturing because it could shut off the car. They recalled it, replaced the fuel pump with a good one. Life is good. You'll never hear about it again, just like business as usual with Toyota. However, there is a problem that developed with this engine that will mask itself as a bad fuel pump, and it had people coming back after the fuel pump was done complaining about it. The purge valve gets stuck open, and it basically causes a vacuum leak, and for whatever reason it actually sets fuel pressure codes. I don't understand the logic behind that, but that's what we're seeing. So if you have fuel pressure codes and lean codes combined with kind of rough running or not really lack of power a little bit, the first thing you need to check is the purge valve. And it's super simple. All you do is disconnect this hose. When the car is running, you should not have vacuum when the purge valve is off. You got to make sure it's off. If it's clicking away, you got to disconnect the connector and then try it. You should not get vacuum through that. If you get vacuum, that valve is stuck open when it's supposed to be closed, and it's leaking vacuum that way. And last but not least, and this is not a problem, this is just more so you know, this engine is super loud. I've talked about this in the direct injection port when we talked about it. It is super loud. Don't be concerned. That is a normal characteristic of this engine and other engines like the A25A. People complain about that one too. This engine is loud because of the direct injection, and yes, it comes and goes as it switches between the two injection cycles. So don't worry. This is normal. Nothing to worry about. This engine is loud and nothing is metal or about to break. That's just the way they are. So is this engine better than the one before it? In my opinion, it is. However, there are a few good things and a few bad things about it. And let's sum it up. Serviceability is somewhat easier. Spark plugs are much easier, for example. You can check this video out. I did on the spark plugs. They're much easier than the one before it. The other thing is the belt tensioner is much easier. I mean, belt tensioner is a wear item. Eventually it's going to go and it's going to make noise. Before it used to be a nightmare. Now it's something very simple. The exhaust manifold, not exactly a wear item. However, it is simpler, it is easier. The easier it is to come out, the less labor it costs and the less cost to you when the car has 200,000 miles and you got to replace a catalytic converter, for example. But to offset that, it's not all rainbows and butterflies. There are a few bad things. First one is the coolant, the plastic. I don't know how this engine will age, but from experience with plastic and cooling systems, it's not a good idea. Whether it's production cost or lightness or whatever the case may be, it's not a good idea. And it's at some point these plastics are going to get brittle, break, leak, and now we're back to square one. The only good thing is on this engine, this configuration of it, it's very easy to replace the two components, the thermostat really and the bypass pipe in the back. They're super easy to replace, nothing crazy about them. And the biggest downfall of this engine, in my opinion, service-wise, of course, not reliability-wise, is the coolant bleeding. They removed the bleeder that we used to use, and I have a video, I'll leave it here and in the description. We used to have a bleeder in the old 2GR FE to bleed these engines with coolant. Took 5 minutes, super simple, and the system is bled, life is good. This engine, they decided to remove that bleeder. Bad decision in my opinion, but they have a reason for it. So bleeding this engine is very tough and very time consuming, and in the future I'll be making a video about that to share with you some tips on how to bleed it. It's still a nightmare, but it can be done because I've done it. I hope this video is helpful and informative. I hope this gives you a small glimpse about what changed in this new V6. And when I say new V6, this is not the newest V6 that Toyota have ever made. There is a new V6 that came out in the Lexus side first, Lexus LS500. It is the V35A, which is the dynamic force V6 variant. It's also a 3.5 liter, it's also a V6, but it is not to be mistaken with this one. This one is likely at some point gonna go and replaced by something else, perhaps the V35A. But the V35A, you're gonna see it in the LS500 first, 2018 and up, and then it is already out in the Land Cruiser 300 series, overseas, not in the United States unfortunately, and potentially it will be the engine for the Tundra. We'll have to wait and see. If you like this video, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.